Good evening. I call the October 2nd, 2024 Apple Valley Planning Commission meeting to order. The first item of business is the approval of the agenda. Is there any changes from staff?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. We have no changes for you at this time.
Thank you. Any changes from the commissioners?
Move approval. Second.
Thank you. That was moved by Commissioner Schindler and seconded by Commissioner Scanlon. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item of business is the approval of the consent agenda. The consent agenda items are considered routine and will be enacted with a single motion without discussion unless a commissioner or a citizen requests to have any item separately considered. It will then be moved to the land use action items for consideration. Can I get a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Scanlon, seconded by Commissioner Schindler. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Brings us to public hearings, and it looks like there's none on the agenda tonight. So that brings us to land use action items. And we have tonight a zoning ordinance amendment, cannabis business ordinance by Alex Sharp.
Thank you, chairs, members of the commission. Chair, members of the commission. So the commission previously reviewed this item on September 18th. There were very little concern items, and so we did move this forward a little bit from the schedule that you previously had seen. I will go through a pretty light recap here. We are seeking action from the commission this evening. We are looking for that top action where you recommend adoption of the ordinance, and then add in a provision to address a commissioner concern that was expressed. I'll bring that up a little bit later, go into a little more detail. And then secondarily, we are asking that you make that adoption also subject to a recommendation on whether separation distances between retail businesses should be sought, and if so, at what distance that the council suggested would the planning commission also recommend. So real quick, just based on some initial pieces, wanted to make sure the commission's aware of a recap of some of what was discussed at the last meeting. Last meeting, there were essentially three major provisions that City Council recommended going forward with based upon state statute. State statute allows the City of Apple Valley to limit the total number of cannabis retail sales based on 12,500 residents. The maximum or minimum number that we could allow would then be 5 by our current population. That was something that was recommended by the City Council and then presented to the Planning Commission. We didn't hear any comments or concerns on that number. Secondarily, it was based upon separation buffer distances. Should we have them between sensitive uses? Those sensitive uses were things like daycares, schools, halfway houses, things of that nature. They were also set by state statute at 1,500 feet as their maximum buffer that they were allowed to have. And those distances were set by state statute, presented to City Council. Pretty universally, they recommended that that the city move forward with 1,000 and 500 foot separations at their maximum distances. So presented that to City Council, but very minimal discussion as they were already recommended by City Council to be at the maximum distance unless the commission felt they should be less for some reason. Third was overall zoning districts, which we presented to you, and if you do have any questions, can go into greater detail. Not prepared to present on all of the zoning districts at this time this evening though, as we did go through that pretty thoroughly. And then the one major question that City Council had asked commissioners to study was those buffer distances. With that, I'm going to go into some of the public testimony because that was a little bit more what I was planning on going into, but wanted to make sure that I'd answered or addressed questions of the commission that they'd had previously. So we received no public testimony, and by this I mean there were no comments from people that came up. However, we did receive one written testimony that was entered into the record. You had that on your DS last time. That namely was in concern about the definition of a retail cannabis business. Our city attorney shared that concern and has gone back and revised our definition within the draft ordinance before you this evening. The draft ordinance was then sent out to that concerned party. They were able to review it and withdrew any concern from their comments, so we were able to address their concern as part of the definition. Secondarily, one of the primary comments that staff heard that the commissioners had was what would occur if a existing licensed and registered retail business within the city of Apple Valley were to go into place, and then one of those sensitive uses that have those 500 or 1,000 foot buffers, schools, daycares, etc., were to move in closer once that business had been established. The city attorney did a very good job of addressing that at the last public hearing. However, we did find some example language in the City of Lakeville ordinance that we are going to amend, and you'll see that part of your motion this evening is to kind of tweak out that language a little bit. It'll be very similar to what you see in the motion itself, essentially stating that that use will be allowed to continue if it was licensed and registered prior to one of the sensitive uses moving into place. It would not be obviously subject to if the Planning Commission and City Council adopt an additional buffer between retail spaces. So that's not what it's attempting to address. Just so you have a little bit of background on what that Lakeville provision is, I've copied it directly from their ordinance. Lakeville only chose to include buffers from schools. They didn't include daycares or those other sensitive uses that we've spoken about. And they actually didn't include a full 500-foot buffer, or I'm sorry, a full 1,000-foot buffer. They only put in a 500-foot buffer. So our motion, or our ordinance, will address all of the other uses as well, not just the schools, but it'll be similarly worded to what you've seen in both the recommended action and then in the provision above. That addresses the Planning Commission's concern about that going forward. I will suggest that you just take a look at that motion, make sure that you are comfortable with it as we move forward here, but if you've got questions on it or need to tweak it, we can. What this does allow is for the city attorney and staff to determine where in the ordinance we want to place this provision, as we didn't have it within your draft ordinance for this evening, but we will have it in time for the city council review. There is one additional motion that I've noted already. Just wanted to go into a little bit of detail on that so that you could ask questions if you want to and to facilitate your discussion. I additionally also have the map that was shown to you at the last meeting to help show you some of those already existing buffer distances that were recommended at their maximums, whether that be 500 or 1,000. There was one commissioner who had asked at the last meeting what the difference between a 500 and 1,000-foot buffer did in terms of total number of sites, so I want you to have that information as part of your discussion. At a 500-foot buffer between retail cannabis businesses, there'd be approximately 19 sites within the community. At the 1,000, there's only around 13 feet. It starts getting pretty tight at that, but we are pretty confident we could hit that minimum of 5 and be compliant with state statute that we have that. One of the other things to note is that that is an all right amount of number either way, considering after we've added in all of those buffers, whether that be the sensitive or the sensitive use buffers, I should clarify, we have around 87 sites available. So getting down to the 19 or 13 doesn't present a high concern for staff in terms of being able to still say there are sufficient sites within the community percentage-wise. What I'll do is I'll go back to this map if it's helpful for the commission's discussion, as the next slide is asking you to begin making your motions and opening things up for any questions that the commission may have. So if you'd like me to proceed to that slide, I can. Otherwise, we can leave it on here to facilitate your discussion as you are asking questions and moving through the recommendation that we are seeking this evening.
Thank you, Alex. Commissioner Mahowald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alex, I guess this is just more of an observation. I just think I'm a little bit perplexed as to why this is an observation, not really a question at this point in time. Mm-hmm. That it just seems kind of ridiculous the way this gets handed down to the cities and local governments without very much discretion at all. And I just find the heavy-handedness, the mandatory nature of this handed down from on high from the folks in St. Paul is just bizarre. But here we are. And I think staff has done a great job drafting up the ordinance based on the dictates of the legislature and the governor on this particular business that has to be required. And I'm certainly in favor of the maximum buffers that the statute allows, but I also want to note one of the inconsistencies, and I don't have the specific provision of the legislation in front of me, but kind of the strangeness of this whole exercise is that if the buffers that are allowed under the state statute would result in fewer than the maximum number of sites, the city would have to adjust its buffers accordingly. And again, to me, that's just a bizarre, heavy-handed approach that takes this issue completely out of local control. It just sort of, but it is what it is. So I think staff has done a wonderful job drafting the ordinance that is required by state law. I'm going to support it because there's really no other choice that the legislature and the governor have given cities. But I just think it's moving full speed ahead, damn the torpedoes, and, forget letting local governments make decisions that are in the best interest of their cities. It's just being forced down the throats of the cities. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Maybe this was discussed at the last one, so I apologize if this is being repetitive, but I just want to clearly understand a couple of things myself before I get to the other commissioners. Again, I remember talking about it when the city grows, right? So 12,500, if there's more people, do we add another?
Chair Kurtz,
Sure.
yes, but we'd have to add the additional 12,500. Right now, the way the ordinance is written is it would require an ordinance amendment. It was something that staff and the city attorney discussed, but rather than place it per 12,500, we'd rather have the definitive number within the ordinance and go back and amend that if
Amend
needed.
that.
It's going to take some time before we need to add it. So we're not in danger of needing to go back and amend the ordinance in the next several years.
Good. I'll be off the board by then. But the second one I wanted to ask is, and again, I apologize if this has been talked about, but how do you separate them? How are you going to have some on the east side and west side? I mean, they're not all going to be just congulated in one group of area, right? I mean, when they come in, do you understand what I'm saying? Like 42 and Cedar aren't going to have like 4 of them right there, right? I mean, do you have to move them around a little bit? So
Chair
everybody kind
Kurtz,
of
that's the separation buffer that the planning commission is asked to weigh in on with that 500 and 1,000 foot between the two businesses. That would do that.
understood. But that's-
Alternatively, they could congregate all in one area, one intersection. They could be on all 4 corners of Cedar and 42 if separation buffers were not in place.
So
So-
does the applicant get to choose kind of their location? Will you say, well, we've got 4 opportunities, 4 places where you can possibly go into? Do you choose them or do they choose them? Who chooses them?
Like any other retail business, we don't choose how many mattress stores or where they locate.
Really? No, I know
So
that.
if it's a retail, this is a retail sale. The state has categorized it as a retail sale. Like a coffee shop, they could go in all 4 corners. Like a mattress store, they could go in all 4 corners. And without a separation buffer distance, the city would not be able to weigh in on where they would go. We don't pick any more with this business than we would with Bed Bath & Beyond
Sure.
to choose one that's left if they chose to come back in. So this is a retail sale like any other. Tobacco shops are in the same way, which was brought up at the last meeting. There is no separation distance on tobacco shops. There's no separation distance on Apple Valley liquor stores from other uses. This is one of the very few uses that would have that. The only other example, 2 examples that we have in code are adult uses with separation distances from sensitive uses, and Class 2 restaurants, which are those with high drive-through, very little sit-down, and Class 2 hoods, so your typical fast food. They have a 1,000-foot separation distance from residential. Those are our only 2 existing examples of a retail sale that have that kind of a buffer. So just giving you the context as it was brought up at the last meeting, but staff, the city would not choose individual locations. They would apply for them, and if they are compliant and outside of all buffers, would be permitted.
You understand my concern, right? No, I get it, I understand it, it's just, it can affect people's property in one area, if it's heavily in one area versus in another area.
Chair Kurtz, I believe that's the concept behind the buffer distance, is to prevent individual intersections potentially or areas from becoming overwhelmed with a single business type. That said, from the trainings that staff has attended on this type of business, there is a significant upfront capital investment that will be required. These are regulated similar to liquor stores. They can't just sell any product. They can only sell the specified products that they have, and they must meet some pretty high security requirements that will require some very, very large capital expenditures. And so if you do see this go into a location, there will be a significant investment in that location as well, whether that's for good or ill in terms of how that serves the neighborhood or what the characteristic or feeling is, and I think that's why that separation distance is there. But the one piece that I wanted to at least try to alleviate is you aren't going to end up going into, there are other uses, and not to pick on them, but tobacco shops, for instance, that have gone into lower rent areas and more dilapidated buildings, and they see very minimal reinvestment in their spaces. That's not as anticipated with the use like this, just because of the capital expenditure and their security that they need to have in, and the other state provisions, how they need to set things up. So that was the intent. That is what the industry has stated it has been. Whether that comes to pass is to be told. We haven't seen this come around yet, so ask me in a few years whether that will hold. But that was the intent by some of this. So I wanted to share some of the context because I've had the privilege of being able to attend some additional training, reading some of those additional state requirements that are outside of zoning that we've presented to you, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Scanlon?
Madam Chair? Well, first, Alex, thank you for all the work that you're doing here, and just the explanations and things you're doing tonight is very helpful, so much appreciated yours and along with staff's work on this. A retailer wanting to come in, they can basically look at and come up with a location, any location within these red zoned areas that you have selected, with the exception of the buffered.
Chair Kurtz, Commissioner Scanlon, that is correct.
Okay. Then the next question is my concern is, and I don't have the answer to this, so maybe with some of your education on this and diving into this, you might be able to help out a little bit, that an establishment like this coming in, my concern is the effects on existing retail, whether that's positive or negative. And especially with the ideas, if we don't do any buffering, that, you could have 1, 2, 3, or all 5 of them lined up next to each other and just can be competing, and what that would do to an existing retailer of any type.
Chair Kurtz, Commissioner Scanlon, I think that's a extremely valid concern that I don't think anyone has the crystal ball to fully answer. Looking at other states doesn't provide as clear of a picture as you think that it might. States where it has been done a little better, the regulations have put some of the security stuff in place. Perhaps you don't see as many of the concerns, but there's still concerns within those localities as well. So I don't think there's anything that can fully address that question until we see it occurring. That said, if were I a landlord and this were a multi-tenant building, I would seriously have some reservations about allowing a building or a use like this in. And the trainings that I've been to, most of the time, the cannabis businesses themselves have been advised, either find a very sympathetic landlord or buy the property, or have your landlord buy a property and have you be the sole proprietor. Most of these, by the industry standard, looking around at other states, have been sole proprietor rather than multi-tenant buildings. Whether that will always come to pass here within the state of Minnesota or within Apple Valley, I could not hazard a guess.
Okay. Kind of, just based on my question and your feedback on that, I guess I'm looking to think of it more conservatively in terms of looking out for the existing retailers that are in a particular business zone and to look at the maximum 1,000-foot, because we can always come back if that there's data or there's somebody that comes back with asking for a change in the
So,
zoning, that we can sit back and revisit it and move it to 500 or not put anything on it in the future. But I think until we have a better understanding of it, I'd like to think more conservatively and look at the 1,000 feet option. Thank you.
That's what we're looking for. Yep.
Commissioner Pruitt?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Alex, question on the definition of available sites when you referenced the 500-foot separation distance. These are the buffers between retail sales of cannabis products, or 1,000 feet, 13 sites. Are these undeveloped properties? Are these storefronts that are available currently? Just kind of curious the definition of an available site.
Developable site, thank you, Chair Kurtz, Commissioner Pruitt. Developable site would be any site that allows retail sales within the community. So the one clarification I would have to a prior comment that I wanted to get to was some of the purple, which is our mixed business campus, was set up to allow for some retail business sales, which is why it's on the map. Anywhere that a retail sale would be allowed, whether that's a brand new site or whether that is an existing site that they demolish and refurbish or try to go into a new multi-tenant space, would be considered a retail business site. This is, again, treated similarly to any mattress store, coffee shop, tobacco shop going into any location where they would be permitted.
So not necessarily like a shovel-ready, here's an office front or a storefront necessarily.
It could be, but not required to be.
Okay. Thanks.
Commissioner Sandall?
Chair Kurtz, Alex, kind of following up with Commissioner Pruitt's comments. So if it was the 1,000 buffer zone, 1,000 feet buffer zone, there's 13 sites, but they're not able to rent those sites for whatever reason or buy those sites for whatever reason. Would there be consequences to the city for that? Like, would we have to come back then and allow a
Chair Kurtz, Commissioner Sandhall, if I state this incorrectly, I'll let the city attorney jump in, but no, the city does not control the private market. We don't need to require land to be available for them.
Okay.
We can't prohibit them from at least 5 locations within town. We don't have to make sure that 5 locations within town are available or that we have 5 locations.
Okay.
So all the city is stating, and I'm sorry I haven't clarified this better, the 5 locations is not a requirement that we have at least 5 locations. It's that we couldn't prohibit it down to any less in the number of licenses that we're allowed to, registrations we're allowed to issue. The state will still issue the license. Mm-hmm. The 5 is not a requirement that we have 5 cannabis retail spots, nor that we ensure landowners, property owners would allow 5 locations.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Do we want to weigh in on the 3 options? Do you want to discuss the recommendations of having no buffer, recommending the 500, buffer or the 1,000? Anybody want to weigh in on their opinions and what they desire? Commissioner Halas?
Madam Chair, after the discussion here, it just confirmed what I was thinking prior to this. The 1,000-foot buffer is the one that is going to be a better, I can't say protection of our current retailers, but keeping the cannabis retailers from clumping into a certain area and overwhelming a certain area of town and a certain area where other retailers are doing their business and changing things for them. I think that that's a good way to start off, and I think it was mentioned earlier, is if we have to come back to the table and talk about this again because of whatever the situation might be to change and drop it to a 500, that's an option for us. But I think being conservative on the first round is looking at the 1,000, being consistent on that would be a better bet for what we're looking at.
Thank you. Commissioner Mahowald?
I would concur with those
Okay.
observations.
Anybody else discuss? I guess I personally would say that also. Was in sales for many years, and you never start low and go up high. You always start up high and you can go low, right? And that's what I think too, is that you start out high and then you can always take a look and see what needs to be discussed and altered if need be. Commissioner Pruitt?
I just want to concur with that consensus as well, and knowing that if this becomes an issue or concern, we can revisit it at a future date. I would be supportive of the most conservative of the three options there, knowing there's 13 sites available.
Thank you. Commissioner Schindler, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the 1,000 feet. I mean, the way I kind of look at it is I would treat it no different than the sale of alcohol. To me, it's the exact same thing. And it surprises me that we have no rules on alcohol or tobacco. It kind of surprised me. I guess I should have read things a little closer. But that, I would just treat it like that. So, but since we don't do anything with alcohol sales because the city controls that, I guess I'm comfortable with letting it see how it works at that level. I will say, just to throw this in, I went on business to Albuquerque, and everything's all built out in this business. And if you go into a nice area, the dispensary is gorgeous. You almost want to go in and tour it. Mm-hmm. But if you go to a bad neighborhood, it looks just like a tobacco shop. So I think you're going to get what the neighborhood wants. Because, and also, the number you put in, you're assuming that we have enough people in Apple Valley to warrant 5 to 13 dispensaries. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if 5 can survive here, then there's a need.
I was going to agree with that, saying that if they were business savvy, they would know to keep it, the smoke shops can get kind of dungy out front, or they smoke out front, and that kind of stuff. But if they kept it neat and clean and classy, might get the different kind of people coming in too,
And I think we pigeonhole who the customer base is too.
Sure, makes sense.
Because you go to these affluent neighborhoods in Santa Fe, it's like a museum.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's not just like, cruddy
Sure.
people that are going in and out.
Right. Commissioner Sandal, do you have an opinion?
I do.
Let's hear it.
I concur with what's been said here tonight. I think it makes most sense to go high before moving low if it becomes necessary.
Okay, well, any more questions for Alex before we make a motion? No? Alex, you did a good job, so we don't have to ask you a whole bunch of questions, so thank you for that. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I recommend adoption of the draft cannabis business ordinance with an additional provision stating that the setback buffers do not apply to an existing licensed and registered cannabis retailer if one of the setbacks special uses subsequently commences operation within the buffer area, Additionally, the Planning Commission recommends a 1,000-foot separation distance buffer between retail sales location of cannabis products.
Do we also add the provision?
He just did.
No, about the setback buffers do not apply to the existing license?
Chair, apologies
You do
for the
that?
confusion.
I'm
That's
sorry.
in the original recommendation above.
Gotcha. Second, anybody?
Second.
Okay, so the motion was made by Commissioner Scanlon and seconded by Commissioner Sandal. Do we have any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thanks, Alex. Okay, that brings us to other business, and we will let Tim Benetti have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that, for your time and effort in this very important ordinance, by the way. You're right, it's something that we really didn't expect in my years as a planner that I'd be working on. And I'm sure the planners back in Prohibition days are thinking the same thing. So guess what? We're here, and I think you did a great job. I think I think this will work for our community, and I think the limitations will probably temper that a little bit. So we're hopeful this ordinance will work for everyone in the community. So thank you for your work and your comments tonight. Those are very helpful. Just want to let you know, our next meeting of October 16th, I don't think we have any applications in the pipeline, so I think we're going to give you a night off just before Thanksgiving. And we'll have our next meeting on November 6th, and our council October 10th and 24th. Our plan is to bring this ordinance back to the council for either October 24th for first reading, and if they're inclined to do so, they may waive the second reading and just adopt it that night. So feel free to just chime in or text or email us if you have any questions on that. Other than that, have a good evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, that was moved by Commissioner Schindler and seconded by Commissioner Halas. All in favor, say aye. Aye. This meeting has adjourned.
Oh, did you?